Hello, one and all, to the 10th episode of the Stranger Nerds podcast. I'm Mitchell Lee alongside Tommy Grant on the Jersey Nerds Productions. And we're without Connor Vandermark and Nick Izzo for this one. So instead of our typical watching an episode and going through our thoughts, feelings, concerns, who we want Nancy to end up with, banter that we usually go through at this time of night, we're going to do something a little bit different because we don't want to talk about these episodes without these guys. If one person's off, we can kind of get their thoughts and opinions on the next one briefly. But with half of the podcast not being available to record, we thought maybe let's do something a little bit different, hold off, do the next one as we get further and further into season 2 with Connor and Nick to join us. So Tommy had a fantastic idea, and it really works out given the fact that we just wrapped up season 1 to kind of go through and the show has always been known as kind of a throwback, an homage to
The 80s.
classic 80s movies. Spielberg is kind of synonymous. The Spielberg blockbuster is kind of synonymous with the time. It's kind of the thing that everyone looks back on fondly, but there's a lot of other stuff to look at as well. But I will let Tommy start us off with what he thinks is the biggest influence and the most referenced, whatever category you want to put these in.
It's hard to really categorize these because, the Duffer Brothers took inspiration from dozens and dozens of classic 80s sci-fi. I'd probably say sci-fi and horror movies. And I thought this was a good episode for you and I to do, Mitchell, since for those of you that have listened closely, Mitchell and I are big movie nerds. Mitchell
Yes.
definitely being the superior of the movie nerds. How
I
many
think
movies
that
have you seen
what
this year?
I have seen, I just got to 80 this year.
Yeah, that's legendary.
Just after watching
Dedication.
Godzilla -1, that was my 80th movie of the year.
And that's a
So
great movie to top on to number 80.
it was lovely, fantastic. But we're here to talk about some other movies that are great, and some of them I have not seen. We're kind of in
Yeah,
the
I know
in the
before the show you had
weeds.
mentioned you hadn't seen a few of these, so I'm interested to hear which ones you've
Yeah,
seen off this list. So for those of you listening, we're going to talk off a few, but the major movies that I listed that the Duffer Brothers had big inspiration from, we have the 1979 movie Alien, the 1988 movie Akira, which is one of the ones I've definitely not seen.
I have not seen
1977.
that either, although I hear it is a classic, and I really want to get more into those kind of anime movies.
We will definitely have to watch because I had never even heard
It's
of it.
it's on the 4106 or whatever movie list I sent you the other night.
Is it?
It's on there, yeah.
Oh, perfect. All right, so we'll have to watch that. Then the 1977 film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is a classic sci-fi movie from that time.
That's another one that I have not seen.
I've seen bits and pieces, but it's just everyone's heard of that movie, whether
Yeah.
they've seen it or not. They've heard of it.
Oh yeah.
The big one that we've definitely talked on the show quite a bit. We have E.T. from 1982. That is definitely
Never heard of it. No.
liar.
Yeah, no, that although I will say I do think it's a little overrated. I do love it, but I think that it's a
It's
it's
definitely
a
not on
touch
my.
overrated.
It's definitely not on my yearly rewatch of movies.
When it comes to Spielberg, it's not in my like top 5 of his,
No,
but it's
it's
one that
definitely it's more of a kids movie.
everyone kind of seems to want to kind of recapture the magic that movie gave to so many people. And I think it would hit a little bit different if you were a kid in the early 80s. I think that that's something that would kind of stick with you forever. You'd
Yeah.
always talk about it very fondly, like my parents. But it's definitely influential on this show.
Absolutely, and we will definitely. It's definitely one of the bigger ones we will cover on this episode. Then we have 1984 Firestarter, which is another one I have not seen.
There's more of these that I haven't seen than I thought.
Yeah.
Firestar, I know they just remade it last year and no one liked the remake of it. And so that's kind of turned me off to watching this, but I think I'll have to check it out at
We'll have
some
to watch the
point.
originals because nowadays it's just everybody wants to make a remake of the 70s and 80s movies, so we had to at least watch the original before we.
Some of them are decent, like the Evil Dead movies they've been making recently, which wasn't an inspiration necessarily for Stranger Things, but they reference it in one of the episodes. I know there's a
They do.
poster of it. Uh, the Evil Dead movies that have been coming out have been pretty good.
Yeah, that is true. Then we have the 1985 classic The Goonies, which is definitely one of my favorite movies from that era.
It's a good one. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but it is a fan again one of those. If you were, especially if you were a kid in the early to mid '80s, you hold that movie with a special place in your heart,
And
and that's kind of the vibe.
for those listening, we are all 90s kids on this show. We are all, I think we're all born in 94, if I'm not
Actually, I
wrong.
mean, we're '90s kids, but I think that it's we were born in '94, and so we're really like 2000s kids because like
Yeah, but
we were
we still
like
grew up
late
on a lot
night.
of 80s and 90s movies we watched. I know I've watched all these as a kid.
Yeah, well, that's because our parents were like, "Hey, this is what you need to be watching. These
Yeah.
were fantastic
These
when
are
I
the good
was younger."
movies.
Yeah,
So then we
and
have
and
the,
that's kind of where you get the whole storyline line of the kids coming to save the day. Kind of
yeah,
comes from obviously there's been a ton of movies that have had kids as our main protagonists, but it's very strong Goonies vibes from the kids.
yeah. And from there, we have the Indiana Jones trilogy. We have 1975 Jaws, the 1984 film Nightmare on Elm Street, which is one of my favorite horror movies.
I've never seen that one, and that is one of the biggest
Well,
like
now when you say that one,
I
are you saying that series or just that specific Nightmare on Elm Street movie? Because that's the
the
first one.
only Nightmare on Elm Street movie I've seen is the 2010 remake, and it's terrible. And
Wow.
I know I'm really excited to watch the Wes Craven 1984 Nightmare on Elm Street with Johnny Depp. I think I'd really enjoy it.
Did you
Uh,
not know that that was like Johnny Depp's like career starter in film?
yeah, well, it was that between that and the 21 Jump Street TV show that
Yeah.
was yeah, but
I'm
that
surprised you
Elm
never seen this movie.
that Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm really bad with like '80s horror. I'll kind of jump down the list just a two spots. The Shining is one that I've seen. It's probably like the only '80s horror movie that I've seen, and coincidentally, it's also my favorite horror movie of all time.
It is a great one. It's definitely a long one to get through, but if you have the time to sit down and focus, it's a great
Yeah,
movie.
a lot of these horror movies kind of get to the point right away, and The Shining definitely takes its time. But I think that's what I like about it so much.
Yeah. And then to finish up the list, we got Poltergeist from 1982. Another good
That's
one.
another one. That's another one. I
Oh,
have not,
right.
and
Add it to.
I haven't seen the remake for that one either.
Oh, god damn it, Mitchell.
I know. I'm telling you, '80s horror is a major blind spot for me.
We will definitely work on that.
Yeah, we have to.
And then to wrap up this list, we got Stand By Me, 1986, which is actually one of the films I've not seen. I know
Really?
that
Okay. Now
movie.
we get to flip flop a little bit. I
Yep.
love that movie.
I know the
It's a
concept of the movie, but I've never sat down and watched it.
it's a classic. You would love it, and it's also very it's Goonies, but I don't want to say less fun because it is definitely a little bit more serious.
Now, does it
And
count
straight
if I've seen the Family Guy adaptation of Stand By Me?
no, what? That's a thing that exists in
Oh, yeah.
society?
Yes. Family
Oh,
Guy raps on like every pop culture movie since like the 50s. And I know they did one on Stand By Me. And that's part of how I know the
it
concept.
doesn't count though. I will tell you that right now. Does not
I
count.
won't say it counts, but that's where I get the concept. I know where it's like, I know what the movie's about based
Yeah.
off. And then the last, not least, we have the Star Wars trilogy. Obviously, I mean, we don't need to say anything more about that because it's just pop culture wise, it's something that's still going on today.
Yeah,
Great movies.
I don't want to say unfortunately, but kind of unfortunately because the I haven't watched Andor, and I
Okay.
know I need to, but the movies kind of ended on a sour note recently. Like Solo and Rise of Skywalker weren't very good,
Yeah,
and also it just
that's a whole nother tangent for
it
another.
is, and it just created a lot of really nasty internet discourse. So it's a lot less fun to talk about
Yeah, I
than
mean,
it
Star
probably
Wars fans
used to
are
be.
probably the most toxic in all of fandom across the board.
It's yeah, there's a definite argument to be made for that. But because of that, there's a lot of passion
Yeah,
there, and that came from the original Star Wars trilogy, which I mean, there's no real secret as far as what it's really referencing, and then Star Wars is kind of just a rip off, not a rip off, but like it's very heavily influenced from the Dune books.
yeah,
But uh,
that's fair.
11 basically being able to use the Force or something kind of equivalent to that.
Yeah,
And then obviously if there's that Millennium Falcon toy that Mike has at the
yeah.
beginning of one of the episodes.
Well, you know, let's just dive in now with Star Wars because that's
Let's do
definitely
it.
influential because it's more of a they use it as a reference point. Not much of the stories based off of Star Wars in any way, but just referencing it throughout the show, it makes quite a few appearances. And
But it's
just
also not at the point where, because there's a lot of shows, movies that do references to things, and sometimes it feels like you made this movie or show take place in the 80s or 90s or 70s or whatever, just so you could talk about the things that the
yes,
writer or director liked. And maybe that's the case with this, but the important thing is I don't see that. I just see
and,
these
and
kids
when
are
I
existing in this time, so that's what they would be talking about.
yeah, and when I made this list, I did quite a bit of research into what influenced the Duffer Brothers when they used references from these movies, and there's definitely two factors. There's one of they just really loved the movies and they wanted to reference it in some way by either having a movie poster in the room or having a line, or in this case for um, the Star Wars trilogy, they name reference it multiple times and they have several toys in the show. Obviously, the Millennium Falcon is the infamous scene where Dustin is trying to get 11 to use her powers on it. And the other half is where they take concepts from the movie and definitely throw it in there for nostalgia purposes where viewers can go, I've seen that before. That's the movie where they're pulling it from. And we get that with the ET, which is definitely another one we'll be talking quite a bit about in this episode.
I mean, I'll just go right into the ET one. It's very similar in that whole hey, we got to keep ET in Elliot's room until it's safe to come out, and
Yep.
that's very similar to what we have going on with 11 at the beginning of this. And the opening scene, was it the opening scene or just one of the scenes in the first episode where they're all playing Dungeons and Dragons,
Yep.
and it's very similar vibes to the opening of ET,
And that's
where
what
they're all
picked out
sitting around eating what was it, Reese's Pieces or something along those lines.
Reese's Pieces, but they were eating. It's kind of
They're
an
eating
odd
like
thing to pick out.
pizza.
The Duffer Brothers were very specific in that they were eating pepperoni pizza because that's what the kids were eating in ET while they were
Ah,
playing
okay.
dragons. They were eating pepperoni pizza.
Hmm.
But I mean, just silly things like that. It's like no one, unless you've watched ET 1,000 times, no one would watch that opening scene of Stranger Things and go, "Oh, that's from ET." But it's just something that they loved and they threw it in there. It's kind of homage to it.
It's not necessarily me going, "Oh, that's from ET." It's I can tell you're trying to kind of recreate uh, that aura that movie had,
Yep.
and it's one of the rare shows or movies that I feel like it's actually been able to do that
Yeah.
without seeming forced, without seeming like, huh, this is what we're trying to do. I know what you're trying to do, but it's actually working, and it works because of the chemistry of the actors, and
Yeah.
because it's a little more subtle than it is in a lot of other shows where they try to do this.
And also in that first episode too, when we get Will running to the tool shed when the monster's chasing, that's also a scene that they mentioned was a specific homage to E.T. where he's running to that tool shed in the movie. It's just, for those that are cinematic nerds like us, you pick up and say, "Oh, that looks very similar." And that was another scene that, for cinematic purposes, it was pretty much a shot for shot scene from E.T. And I really love that scene, which
Mm-hmm.
is through the mist to the tool shed. And then building on relationships, like you mentioned with Elliot and ET, we get that with Mike and Eleven, where Mike's kind of teaching Eleven about culture and society, and just walking her through the house and looking at things. Another, set of scenes that were very similar to what we get in ET.
Mm-hmm.
But
And they definitely have to do that whole, hey, let's put a wig on ET thing with
yes,
11, where it's like, let's make you look like you're just another kid at school and
and
make you try
thankfully,
to blend in.
11 naturally looked much better in a wig than ET. That was the one scene that always drove me nuts. Watching the movie, I was just like who was watching? Who's just walking around and say, "Hey, that little girl doesn't look normal." Like, just no one noticed. That always bothers me.
Yeah, that's something that I've noticed with a lot of those 80's movies where it's like the adults are the dumbest ones there,
Mm-hmm.
and the kids are the smart ones that kind of have to wake everybody up to what's going on.
Yep.
And this has that as well.
But it's still a comical scene with them going to the school, um, them being Mike 11 and all of them, and
Mhm.
the whole scene. I know we made fun of it in the previous recording. Just, hey, this is my cousin from Sweden. Just like, of all places, like, why wouldn't you
Just
just randomly pick somewhere in the United States?
why not? I'm gonna have to ask you to, because I asked you to kind of highlight some of these that were kind of the bigger influences. So if we go on to Nightmare on Elm Street, I
Yes.
have to defer to you completely, and
I
maybe
yeah.
the Goonies too, because I do not remember much from that movie. It has
So
been a long
let's
time.
touch on the Goonies real quick,
Yeah, go
and
for it.
then we'll hit up Nightmare on Elm Street, because the Goonies, if you can remember a little bit, that might be helpful. We'll
Yeah,
try to brush up your memory, because especially now, in this last episode where we talked, now that we just entered season 2, we have an infamous Goonie in the cast, Sean Astin,
yeah.
and that was definitely a big homage to the Goonies in itself. And that was partially a reason why the Duffer Brothers hired him, is because they based this group of kids off of the Goonie crew, and they're like, "Well, we got to have an original Goonie in this cast at some point in time."
They got the wrong one. Although I do like Sean Astin a lot in season two. They've got to get they got to get Kihoy Kwan,
Yep.
fresh off his Oscar win for Everything Everywhere All at Once. You got to get him in the last season of Stranger Things. Stick him in there somewhere.
But I think I remember, if I remember correctly, Mike's character, from what I read, was actually based off of Sean Astin's character, Mikey, from the
Hmm.
Goonies. So that I thought was a very interesting little homage. However, character wise, to me, I don't think they're very similar at all. But
Hmm.
that was just a little thing that they mentioned, is Mike from Stranger Things was based off of Mikey from the Goonies. But you have,
And his kids,
what's that?
and it's just just the vibe of the kids coming to
Yeah,
save the day.
yeah. I mean, the whole kind of gist of the Goonies was, you have a close knit group of friends, and they go on this big adventure together, and that's kind of how it is here. It's just, we have a group of kids that just fell across this random, girl in the middle of the woods, and they go on all these adventures together, and just the exchange, and you're going through puberty, and you're getting like little love interest going on, and you get boys going with girls and going, ew, I don't like girls, but now all of a sudden they're liking girls, and you get that conflict with Lucas and Mike, and kind of growing up, where Lucas was very against including a girl into the group and including anybody new. And now in season 2, we're already starting to see that kind of flip flop where Mike is now completely against the girl because he lost his girlfriend. So you're getting a lot of teenage drama getting thrown into the mix. And that's definitely a coming of age type trope with any movie or TV show. And we're definitely seeing that comparison between the two. As far
So
as
I
that,
guess, good.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna move on to a different one, so let's finish up with your thoughts on the Goonies first before we start jumping around.
Yeah. So one more quick thing is the Duffer Brothers mentioned that they mirrored the characters from Stranger Things off of the characters from Goonies. The leader of the group, Mike, um, is referenced to the character in the Goonies, and then there's the athlete trope who is played by Steve Harrington. The swath trope was based off of Lucas Sinclair, and then the resourceful character was Will Byers, and the pessimist Dustin Harrison, and
I
popular
don't
Nancy.
think that was Dustin a pessimist. I thought Lucas was the one that was a lot more
That's what they
like.
referenced. So going to the
Mm,
Goonies section, the leader of the group was called Mikey. He had an athletic older brother, Brandon Walsh, who I believe was played by blanking on the character's name, actor's name. Um, Played Cable in Deadpool.
Josh Brolin, yeah, that's who I thought it was too. I
Yep.
just wasn't 100%. But yeah, Josh Brolin.
Now Josh Brolin is an actor we need in Stranger Things. We need a Josh Brolin.
We
In,
need a police detective duo of Josh Brolin and Kihoy Kwan. Do
oh
it.
yes,
Let's get it.
that
Um, Indiana Jones. I saw you mention that, and you have that listed here.
yep.
And
It was a very minor reference, but
yeah,
they talked about Hopper's character and how his banter between characters, his fighting, or specifically his fighting skills, which is definitely just the one strong hit punch, and his hat were specifically based off of Indiana Jones, which I can definitely see.
I didn't get that vibe.
No,
I no, I didn't get that at all. And it's not a detriment to the story. It's not a detriment to Hopper. Not a detriment to Indiana Jones. Nothing like that. I just didn't really see it.
I mean Hopper doesn't scream Indiana Jones to me, but I can see what they're going for with one. He's always got his sheriff's hat on, very similar. He's very passionate about his hat, just like Indiana Jones. And his fighting style is kind of similar to Indiana Jones because in the movies, Indiana Jones doesn't really fight, and if he does, he usually does one really hard cocked back punch and then uses his whip. Same thing
Hmm.
with Hopper. He's really just kind of a one strong hit to knock him down, and hopefully that's it. Hopper definitely does a little bit more fighting than that, but I can see the inspiration behind it.
Okay. Now I see what you have written down for Jaws, and knowing that it's their probably their favorite film isn't necessarily surprising. However, the quote that you had about the Duffers on the Demogorgon, I think is really interesting. I never
Yes,
thought about it like that.
we'll go into it. Let me hear.
I can I can go ahead. It says it is an interdimensional being that is more common with the shark than from Jaws than Pennywise from It, which is another thing that I kind of thought of, but maybe just more because I saw Finn Wolfhard in It shortly after the first season. When the monster enters our dimension, it's like a shark breaching the water, very much like a shark drags its prey back into its home where it feeds, which yeah, that makes sense, and I never really thought about the Demogorgon in that particular way, but now I do.
And they kind of have a conversation about it in the show where Nancy and Jonathan, when they're like kind of theorizing how they can hunt this monster down, they make that comparison where they're saying it's a hunter, it tracks its prey, and it takes it smells blood. very similar to a shark who can, smell blood from miles and miles away. So you definitely see that comparison to a shark, which I didn't think of at the time, but after doing the research, I was like, I can definitely see now the comparison to Jaws.
All right, I'll leave you to Nightmare on Elm Street and Poltergeist. I can't help you at all with these.
So Nightmare on Elm Street is it's a very twisted, fucked up type of horror movie, which
I bet I'd love it.
it's it's not your traditional slasher. You got, Friday the 13th and Halloween are very just straightforward. You got a guy who for some reason can't be killed and just goes on a killing spree. Nightmare on Elm Street, you have a character who basically enters people's dreams and can kill them in your dreams. That's the main concept behind Freddy. And I never really saw the direct reference when I was watching it, but after reading this, I can see it. It's not necessarily the dream aspect in here, but there's definitely little hints sprinkled throughout, and you definitely
I was
definitely see
going
it.
to say I think that might play a bigger influence in
Yes,
seasons to
and
come,
yes,
without giving too much away. But
season 4 is definitely. I mean,
season 4, let me
when we
tell
get to
you,
season
hold
4,
on,
we'll definitely
keep
come
that in the pocket for season 4.
back. But it's just I know the characters themselves were based off of characters in Nightmare on Elm Street, specifically Nancy and Jonathan. Uh,
Wasn't Nancy the main character's name in Nightmare on Elm Street?
yes, if I'm
Okay.
fairly certain it was.
I
Uh,
know I know some stuff about the movie, but I just haven't
so
seen it.
I'll read their little blurb. And Nancy Wheeler's name and character was primarily based off of Nightmare on Elm Street's main character, Nancy Thompson, who is also the final girl of the movie. Her boyfriend is the popular athlete who gets killed by this mysterious entity, aka Freddy, and she goes on a hunt for said monster for revenge. Very similar to this, where not necessarily, where I'm sorry, they have a best friend that's killed by Freddy, not the boyfriend. I think the boyfriend in the movie is played by Johnny Depp, if I remember right. That might be his character.
I don't
Um,
know.
I'm trying to remember who played who. But it's kind of the same concept where Nancy in Stranger Things has the athlete boyfriend Steve. Her best friend Barb is killed by this mysterious monster, and she decides to go on a hunt for it for revenge. Where she meets up with Jonathan, and they go on a whole hunt for the monster, and that definitely plays a big part in season 1. So that aspect of her character is heavily influenced from Nightmare on Elm Street. As for the monsters, not so much, but that's at least for season 1. Like we said, season 4 definitely plays a whole different ball game on that. Um, the Nightmare on Elm Street, I think they referenced with the episode title with the weirdo on Maple Street. I think was slightly in a reference
Yeah,
to Nightmare on Elm Street. That's what I got. Um, yeah, that was really the main chunks of things that I saw from this movie that was inspired by Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm sure Duffer Brothers had a lot of little other things sprinkled through it. Another scene with the Demogorgon when it was pushing through the walls with in the buyer's home where Joyce saw like it's kind of like that weird stretching of the wall and you can see the outline of the head, but you couldn't actually see what the monster was. There was a scene in that movie in Nightmare on Elm Street that was very similar. They were very famous for using kind of like the claws would come through the walls or some sort of door, and you kind of see the fabric of reality stretching with Freddy breaching through the nightmare dimension into our dimension, and they kind of do the same similar dimension splitting type maneuver with the Demogorgon in season 1. That was definitely probably the biggest inspiration outside of Nancy's character. But Nightmare on Elm Street is definitely a movie we will have to sit down and watch because you'll probably see a lot more of the influences when you watch it.
I think there's like 7 Fright, not Fright Night, although
It's
Fright Night's
another
on there as
horror
well.
classic that's
7,
got dozens of sequels.
yeah. There's a lot of different Nightmare on Elm Street movies and something of a spin off like Freddy vs. Jason that's on that
That is
4,100 movie list I sent you.
all right. We'll definitely be watching that because those are gold.
Mm. Well, Poltergeist is another one. I have a remake to watch and an original to watch.
Yeah, that.
So fill me in on how this kind of takes from Poltergeist as well.
So Poltergeist is. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. It's another alternate dimension type monster that we see, and that's definitely another. A lot of the horror movies from the sci-fi world of the '80s, where it's alternate dimensions, definitely plays into Stranger Things, where they have the whole upside down dimension. That was a big influence. But the family aspect of the Byers, I think, or the Byers or the Wheelers, was influenced from Poltergeist, where we have. Let me see here. Got to reference my. I have so many damn notes. It's hard to read through them.
You have an insane amount of notes on this thing.
I that's my thing. It's just I go through them all. I analyze shit, but then I forget what I write half the time. But the one thing, so we talked a lot about the dog in Stranger Things, the Byers family dog who just randomly shows up at random points in the show. That dog was actually influenced from the dog in the family of Poltergeist, because in Poltergeist, the dog randomly sees things happening that the family is unaware of. This dog in Stranger Things kind of has a similar concept where it sees the monster, chasing and attacking Will, but no one else sees it, obviously, because it was the middle of the night. So that was an aspect there.
That
Um,
also has a little Terminator in it too, because for whatever reason in Terminator movies, like it's always like the dog can tell that it's a Terminator, and it's like, how?
because they're dogs, they have that sixth sense.
I guess.
And then the family aspect of the Wheeler family was based off of the Poltergeist family, where they have the father and mother. They have an eldest daughter, a middle son, and youngest daughter, same as the Wheeler family. You got Ted, Karen, then you have Nancy, Mike, and Holly. And Holly's another kind of weird carryover where Holly sees the monster in the walls in that one episode, Holly Jolly. And that was kind of the same thing. It's similar scene from Poltergeist, that infamous scene where everybody, she's watching the TV and she goes, "They're here." Kind of a same, homage, kind of nod to that scene.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, that's kind of the main draw that I got from Poltergeist. It was a lot more of the character family aspect. I know the costumes were also the costumes of the Wheelers were very heavily influenced by the Poltergeist family. But again, unless you're a big costume and design nerd, you wouldn't really probably notice it at all.
That's something that I'll probably notice once I watch Poltergeist.
Yeah, and that's definitely an important part of shows when you're trying to really get that nostalgia kind of aspect to a show. The Duffer Brothers did a great job of really making sure as much stuff from that time frame was in the show as possible. Between video games, movie posters, clothing, like the music being listened to, you feel like you're in the 80s watching the show. There's a lot of other TV shows don't put as much effort into it, and you're like, there's always those scenes where you're like, that was definitely not in that time frame. Like, it just sticks out. Whereas they were very faithful to the 80s. They wanted you to feel like you were in an 80s sci-fi type show, and that's one thing
Yeah,
they did
I
well.
had a I can get very nitpicky with those types of things. Like for example, I saw a movie that came out a few weeks ago, and it takes place in 2006, over the summer of 2006, and yet they're at home watching Superbad on DVD. That came out in 2007. It didn't get released on DVD until winter of 2007. So you're
And again,
wrong. You should have been watching
unless
something
you were
else.
there, living in 2006, and you have a very fond memory of not being able to have that on DVD, you would never know.
Exactly, yeah. But that just kind of stuck out to me, and it kind of took me out for a minute. So it can happen. It can happen.
And like,
The next two are really interesting to me personally because these are two of my all time favorite movies.
yeah,
The Shining being my favorite horror movie. definitely that scene where she's kind of breaking through the wall with the axe.
Yep.
Definitely an homage to Jack Nicholson and the "Here's Johnny" scene from The Outlook, or The
Yes.
Overlook. It's been a while since I've watched the movie. For some reason, it's a long one. It's one that you have to be, ready to sit and
Yep.
watch it. It's not a casual watch,
No, it
but
is
at the
not.
same time, it's a classic, and it definitely had vibes of that iconic moment from the
I'll be honest.
famous
Sometimes
Stanley Kubrick
if
movie.
I want to watch The Shining, I'll sometimes skip like the first half hour of the movie.
Yeah, I can't do that with movies. I've got to be all the way
What?
in.
Because I've watched it so many times, but it's like the whole first out like half hour is them just traveling to the hotel and learning about the hotel.
Yeah, no,
Nothing
it
happens
is,
in the context of the movie in that first half hour, so I usually just
but
skip.
it's just it's building tension and building character
I know.
and getting the mood going. But that was definitely the big shining uh, tribute, and then Stand by Me is definitely more of vibes. Although there's some stuff as far as like the bullies, they do have kind of very Stephen King esque bullies in Stranger Things, where they're just always looking to beat up our protagonists.
Yeah,
They carry weapons,
yeah.
and
Stephen King has very violent bullies.
Stephen King is bullies from another dimension, as far as I'm concerned. It's insane. But the vibe of Stand by Me, the child actors reading lines from scenes of that movie during auditions makes a lot of sense because it does carry a very similar tone of we want you to like being with these kids, but at the same time they're in a very serious situation and they're in very serious danger, and we want you to feel that as well. And Stand by Me, like I mentioned, it's not like the Goonies where it's fun. You like being with the kids. All of that stuff is true, but at the same time, it's a much more serious movie, and there is real danger that these kids are in, and also just real consequences. And we get to more of that over the course of other seasons, but the tone of Stand by Me is it's a tough one to manage because you do still want the fun loving kind of recklessness of the kids, but you want to take them seriously as well. And I think Stranger Things uh, walks that line pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, bullies can definitely play a good aspect in taking things to a more serious note when you have a TV show or film that has a, let's say, a violent bully, but more of a high stakes bully. It's not just a calling names and teasing. It's like they get violent, and you realize, all right, these kids are going through this every day, and actually getting like bullied by these kids, and it makes you feel for the character more. I mean, you have Dustin who has an actual physical condition, and Mike just gets bullied because he looks weird. But you have these bullies that pull blades on you in middle school. I We never went through that. Like there was no bullies pulling blades on us in middle school.
There was some stuff in middle school that was like it was kind of rough, but it was nowhere near that.
Yeah, like we had just
It was just like, man, I am going to either like the physical was just like punching,
yeah.
but like and also just you're gonna get flamed at the lunch
There
table
was,
for
there,
what those shoes you're wearing, but
like there was nothing. There was no life threatening bullying that we faced in middle school. Whereas this was life threatening. It's like, hey, I'm gonna slice your friend's mouth open with this knife, or unless you jump off the cliff and basically kill yourself. Like that was a whole nother level of extreme in this show that I remember the first time watching, I was like, what the fuck? Like that's a new like level. I was not expecting that.
did you say that you had seen Firestarter?
I had not.
Okay, so that's the one that neither one of us can really comment on too
Yeah.
terribly much, but it is one that you referenced. Uh, I can't really add too much to it except for
I
I've
just
just never heard a single good thing about that remake.
when I was reading the notes from the Duffer Brothers off of the movie, I thought it was just important to put down there because the protagonist, the name is Charlie McGee from Firestarters, has very similar abilities with 11. According to the notes, they were both young girls with psychic abilities who are pursued by malevolent government agencies.
I really thought that Charlie McGee was going to be a story about a young man, like a 11-year-old boy who learned how to talk to pigs.
Right?
Yeah.
But and then it goes on further where it's like both Charlie and 11 have mothers who, while in college, participated in secret government experiments involving the intake of hallucinogenic drugs. Charlie and
Oh,
11
don't
are
we
born.
all?
Charlie and 11 are born with supernatural powers as a result to these experiments. I mean, it's literally like they took the character from Firestarter and created 11 out of it.
Uh-huh.
Is I thought that was important to mention because that's pretty much a direct influence for Eleven's character, and we get that with Akira as well. Um, Akira, I think, was another one. Neither have you seen Akira?
Akira is not one that I've seen.
Okay, so that was another one we haven't seen. So both the movies that heavily influenced Eleven's character are both movies we have not seen. So conveniently enough, Akira was similar concept with the whole psychic powers. In Akira, apparently the uh, main character is being used to spy on the Russian government, or I think it was a secret government weapon or something like that. And the kids in these movies call themselves the Espers, and they assign numbers to these kids as kind of an identity. And the main character, Akira, was number 28. So that was kind of more of an influence towards Eleven's, infamous tattoo and being called 11 in the show. So Akira and Firestarter were two big influences for Eleven's character, which is important to mention because she's kind of the main character of the show.
Yeah.
And then the last one, Alien, is very small reference, but the scene in the finale where they find Will with the like tentacle going down his throat and the eggs that Hopper finds throughout the layer of the Upside Down, that was a big nod towards Alien. But other than that, that was kind of it for Alien. But again, it was worth mentioning because Alien is a classic sci-fi movie from that time.
I have seen that one. And
I've
I am in the very, 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 very small minority in that. I do not like that movie.
yeah, I've
It
seen it
just
once.
I
I'm not a fan. It was
it
never my
it,
cup of tea.
it just bored the hell out of me. Now I loved Aliens. I thought Aliens was fantastic, but Alien just it didn't grip me, and it just didn't work for me.
Yeah,
And sometimes it's some classics you're not gonna hit 100% with what everyone else thinks.
but hey, we can't love them all.
That's true. That's true. Part of me wanted, and I know that this is something that maybe we can't get too deep into, and we have no plans for it whatsoever. But if we run into this type of scenario again, kind of, I'd like to just imagine what Connor and Nick think are coming in seasons 2, 3, and 4, given what we've seen so far. Like, what do they think is coming down the pipe? Let's just get a quick prediction and then ask him this at the beginning of the next episode. Just like a very quick, where do you think we
I
are
will.
compared to where we are now?
I mean, I don't know if you've noticed every episode when I'm asking for the predictions, I'm trying to get more out of them.
Yeah, I,
And
I, I have a feeling that
Connor,
they don't want to give
Connor
you.
definitely goes more in depth towards what the characters are doing, and Nick kind of just gives a very general vibe off of what Connor says a lot of time.
Yeah,
I really want to get them to think about what's coming down the road because you and I know, season 4 they have tiebacks all the way back to season 1, and
yeah,
I want them to make guesses because I would love to see their predictions come either true or not true come season 4
yeah.
because we know what happens, so we can kind of push them in the right direction of like, hey, this is important, pay attention to this.
Hmm.
And Nick actually made a couple good predictions last episode. when they were
Nick,
mentioning, yeah,
Nick, when he says something, I'm like, oh man, I feel like maybe he's catching on to stuff a little quickly.
yeah, Nick's definitely on the right track. So I hope he doesn't listen to this and get confirmation of it. But yeah, he's definitely on the right track. So he's picking up things. But again, we're all adults. Sometimes these things are easy to predict, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Hey, we don't know what's coming in season 5, so there's
I
always
can't
something
wait.
to throw us a loop there too.
I've been sitting just waiting for some sort of teaser to come out.
I mean, hey, the strike's done,
I
so
know.
they can start working on it, and
I think they've already started. It's just a matter of waiting for something to come out.
yeah, I think that they have.
I mean, we finally got a teaser trailer for House of the Dragon season 2, which I'm very looking forward to.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to them getting The Last of Us season 2 going, because the first season, while I don't think as good as everyone else says it is, I did really enjoy it. Uh, but yeah, no, there's lots of stuff to look forward to, and hopefully we're talking about it.
Yeah. So next time we have just a week of you and me, we'll touch base on some more movies and things that influence Stranger Things, and maybe talk about those movies more in depth.
Sounds good to me. And hey, if nothing else, this has given me, you, and anyone listening a lot of good 70s and 80s movies to put on the watch list if you haven't already,
Yeah,
or rewatch. Because I mean, like for example, Stand by Me. Never a bad time to watch Stand by Me,
I might have to start watching. I might watch Stand by Me this weekend if I
and
have
not
time.
the South Park one, the actual
No,
the actual Stand by Me.
I will watch the full movie
There you go.
if
All
I have.
right, well that'll wrap things up for this episode of Stranger Nerds. For Tommy Grant, I'm Mitchell Lee, and you've been listening to the Stranger Nerds podcast on Jersey Nerds Productions.
Have a good night.